Hey there, darlings. Welcome to the Farmer's Table. My name is Jess, and I'm so glad to have you here with me in my kitchen today. Get a cup of tea, a cup of coffee. We have quite the cooking endeavor to tackle today. Today we are making a big pot of one of my favorite things, gumbo. So this video is actually going to be somewhat in and out because this is a long process. The first thing I am doing here, I've got a bunch of chicken leg quarters, and I have just been browning them to get some extra flavor. I'm going to be putting all of these back in the pan. It's not I just real quick brown some salt and pepper, and I'm going to cover them in water to make a pot of broth and to cook this chicken to go in our gumbo. Alright, all this chicken's going back in and the water over it. So this is going down to low, and I'm going to simmer it for probably about an hour. So when it comes to cooking like big pots of soup, stews, in this case gumbo, if you need a lot of broth for something, when I'm making a big recipe, and I'm making this to feed our large family, we have another family coming over for dinner, they have a large family, and I just always overshoot because I'm never mad at leftovers. I'm always glad to eat something the next day, especially if it is one of my favorite things to eat. So when I know I'm going to be using like a gallon to a gallon and a half of broth, instead of going and tapping into any of the broths I have preserved in jars or in the freezer, because I've already put all the work into having those preserved, I usually will try to work making a pot of broth with the things I need from the recipe in. So like I need chicken for the gumbo anyway, so in this case I get the chicken for the gumbo, I get the broth, and I'm not using the preserved stuff I would rather have for when I'm like on a time crunch. I'm going to save that convenience for later and go through the extra trouble today. It's a little bit later. My broth is still steadily going. I'm going to start doing my chopping for my gumbo. I actually tried to film a gumbo cook with me vlog about a month ago. I made gumbo, but during that video I had to be very honest about my own limitations. I can cook and make a video. I can cut and make a video. I cannot manage to make a perfect roux while cutting and making a video. So when I realized that my roux was at a risk for being burnt by my attention limitations, I turned the camera off and scrapped what I had already shot. Sorry. But this time I'm just going to get all of my chopping done before I start making my roux, and that way I can keep you guys involved in the whole process. So if you are unfamiliar with gumbo, very traditional Cajun dish. Gumbo, the word gumbo, it originates from the word gumbo, which means okra. Okra was brought to the United States with enslaved people who were brought over, and this is why it's very common in Southern cuisine. A lot of Southern cooking has its roots in slavery, and okra is native to Africa, and gumbo means okra in, I believe, in an African tongue. I'm not 100% sure which one it is. But I live in South Carolina, and the Charleston area was founded around the same time as the New Orleans area. I am originally from Arkansas. Much of my family is from Louisiana, and I would say that of my food preferences, what has probably influenced it the most as far as the different types of cuisine, it would be Cajun cuisine. I like spicy food. I like things that are a little more on the heavily seasoned side. Having lived in an area that was very heavily influenced by Cajun food, and then moving to South Carolina has been very interesting because a lot of the food is the same, but the seasoning is very, very different. And this is just my observation. I'm sure some people may have their own opinions about this, but in my observation, my experience is that Cajun food has a lot more spice and seasoning than Low Country food. Very similar things. You can get shrimp and grits in both places. I haven't seen gumbo like paraded as a super popular thing in South Carolina, though I do see it on many menus. I've yet to have a gumbo in South Carolina that is as good as the ones that I got whenever I lived in closer to Louisiana or in Louisiana. I don't know, I'd be interested to know your kind of thoughts or observations on that if you have a dog in that fight. I think really when it comes to food preferences, I am so fascinated in how different people groups do different things. I'm so fascinated to know the history of how certain foods became adopted in certain regions. Like for instance, I was told once by some guys we know that do like artisan butchery, hand-hewn farms. They were talking about how Southern food is typically much more salty than food from very northern places. And that's a pretty agreed upon assessment, that Southerners use way more salt in their food. And they say that that goes back to refrigeration, and that in the South, where it's a lot harder to have like an effective root cellar and to store food without refrigeration, and it's a lot hotter, that people used to have to rely on really salt curing things and like going very excess on the salt, whereas in northern places people had root cellars, and so they were able to store food without as much salt, and that just gets passed down as far as what's normalized. And whereas I have ordered shrimp and grits, I finally learned after a couple years of living in South Carolina, because I'd get so excited to see stuff like shrimp and grits on a menu, and I would order it expecting the shrimp and grits I grew up with, being from Arkansas, Louisiana people, and then I would get it here and I'd be like, it's kind of bland, and it was just very different. Whereas I think that if I gave Louisiana shrimp and grits to somebody who's from Low Country, South Carolina, they might choke on it because it's so strong. All of that said, I have learned since moving here. I've made gumbo over the years. I didn't fool with it a lot when I lived in Arkansas because it is a lot of work. It's a kind of extensive process. And there were multiple restaurants that if I had a craving for a bowl of gumbo, I could just go get one. And it was going to be exactly what I was craving. Not the case here. So since we've moved, I've made significantly more gumbo than ever before in my life. And it's actually very simple as far as what's in it. Gumbo is not extravagant. However, it takes quite a while to make it. And there's a tiny bit of, I guess you could say, finicky process. Gumbo is stewed the Holy Trinity, as it is called in Cajun cooking, which is peppers, onions, and celery. And then I've also heard it reference the Holy Trinity and the Pope, which is the garlic. I don't know. That may be offensive to some people. I have no clue, but it's just what I've heard it called. And then, of course, you can put a number of meats in it. What I do is shrimp, chicken, and sausage, which ideally you want to have like an andouille sausage, which I actually did find a place here locally that I was able to get that. That's hit or miss here because that is a Cajun sausage. An andouille sausage is just a smoked cased sausage that has like more peppers and Cajun type seasoning in it versus an Italian sausage, which is going to have more Italian flavors. The big thing with gumbo is that it needs to have a very dark roux, and to make a roux you just use oil and flour, and you cook it on, you know, low enough heat that it doesn't burn. And to get a really dark roux for a very authentic Cajun gumbo, that takes about an hour to make the roux, 45 minutes to an hour. Now I've seen people who have shared different methods where you can make roux in the oven and stuff like that. I've actually never tried that. You know, when I've got like dinner guests coming over, and something that I'm really looking forward to eating, I'm just not willing to take that many chances. So right now, I'm just gonna get all of my peppers, onions, and celery cut to nice small bits. My chicken has been simmering for about an hour. I'm gonna pull these out and let them cool off enough to handle, at which point I will pick the meat off. Broth actually looks pretty good even just an hour. So what I've done here, this is considered chicken broth. It's just not bone broth. In order for something to be bone broth, you need to simmer the bones for a long while. And that's how you get like that really collagen rich broth. And that's what I typically like to make. I do beef bone broth real regularly, and anytime I've got leftover chicken carcasses, I'll put them in a big container in the freezer until I have 3 or 4 of them, and I'll take those carcasses and make broth with them. And when I make chicken bone broth, I will like simmer it overnight. It's a lot of hours. With beef broth, I do it for like 36 hours at least. So that's a very long process, but this right here, as you can see, with that much chicken in, it was probably like 1.25 gallons, 1.5 gallons of water. That's made a really rich broth. I'm going to put that on the back burner. To make a good roux, you want a very heavy bottom pot, and this you want to pull up a stool for, because it's going to be a minute. All right, before we get started with this roux, I will put a roundabout recipe for gumbo in a printable document down below. I'm not following an exact recipe, as you may notice. When I look up recipes and I see things like this many cups of bell peppers or this many cups of onions, that makes absolutely no sense to me, because bell peppers don't come in cups. And so for me, I typically try to do things by, like, I just did a whole big bunch of celery, and then 2 onions and 3 bell peppers, and it might turn out slightly different from time to time. I'm okay with that. Like, that's just how I cook. That makes way more sense to me. With that being said, I'm making a really big pot of this today. Gumbo is it's pretty involved, and so I like to make a lot of it. So what I'm doing here, I have my heavy bottom pot. I have cast iron Dutch ovens. I actually the end product of this will end up in a big cast iron Dutch oven, the one I'm using for broth. I prefer making my roux in like a heavy bottom stainless steel pot on my electric stove. I just feel like I have more control of the heat on that. That's gonna come down to preference. I just wouldn't use a real lightweight pot, because you do want pretty consistent heat. I like using the stainless steel because it cools off a little faster, so if things are getting too hot too fast, I just feel like I have more control. All right, so to make a dark roux, there are some things that you need to know. Basically, the bottom line ratio is you want about equal parts oil and flour. Any oil is fine. It is not recommended to use butter, because this is such a long cooking process that the milk solids in butter can actually burn. I think it would probably be fine if you use ghee. I've used butter, I've used ghee, I've used avocado oil, olive oil. Any of those are fine. I just typically at this point I like to use an oil versus a butter. If you are using gluten-free flour, the typical rule with a roux is if it starts to get black specks in it at all, it's not good. Usually that means your roux has turned, it's burnt part of it. That's if you're using regular flour. I have noticed in using gluten-free flour, and you know, they're all different. Gluten-free flours are all different mixes, and I have noticed in cooking roux with gluten-free flour that sometimes they do get black specks in them, but just taste them because they might not be bitter. There just are certain things in some gluten-free flours that I guess darken more or blacken more easily, but just that's a little tip to keep in mind. But if you're just using oil, regular oil, and regular flour, you should not have black specks in your roux at all. That's another reason why I like to use a separate pan instead of using whatever I'm browning all my meat and stuff in, simply because I can see more of what's going on in a fresh, clean pan. So I'm heating this oil up over medium heat. I'm gonna let it get hot, so like 3 or 4 minutes before I put my flour in. And once I put my flour in, we are going to steadily stir this mix for the next 45 minutes to an hour as it steadily darkens. So my oil here is starting to kind of have some swirliness to it. It's heating up. You can feel the heat coming off of it. So I'm going to go ahead and start stirring my flour in. Yeah, it's sizzling a bit when I put it in there, which is good to see. So we're just going to steadily stir this. I like to do this with a rubber spatula because it gives me the capacity to scrape anything off, make sure nothing's getting stuck and burning. But you may need a whisk also to break up the flour. Alright, I'm going to turn my heat down and we're going to fluctuate between low and medium low. Right now this is bubbling a little bit, but that's going to come down, so I'm going to make sure that I'm stirring because I definitely don't want to burn it right here out of the gate. If at any point you do burn your roux, you have to start over. That is unfortunate, and that is why I don't make gumbo all the time because it's an involved thing, and getting the roux right is incredibly important. Roux are pretty imperative in a lot of different things that we make. So if you want to nail like homemade mac and cheese, you have to make a very light roux. You make that and then stir your milk in and stir your cheese in to melt it. Bechamel sauces start with a light roux, but dark roux are common in stews, anything you want that real rich mouthfeel. And the thing with gumbo is obviously the most integral recipe, I think, of any gumbo is the okra. Okra has stuff in it called mucilage. It's what makes it taste slimy. It's why a lot of people don't like okra. But the roux coupled with the mucilage of okra kind of gives a good gumbo its distinctive mouthfeel. Now we cook the okra down, which kind of helps eliminate the sliminess. You don't want your gumbo to be slimy. You just want it to be like rich. Oh, it just makes my mouth water thinking about it. So the starting point, as you can see, is this very flour and oil colored, product, because it's not cooked yet. As it starts to darken, first it'll be considered a blonde roux or a light roux, then it will become golden, and then it will become light brown, and we are looking for a dark chocolate brown roux. We want this real dark, and it's going to be a lot of this. So you don't have to necessarily stir it quite this regularly. On the beginning here, when the heat's coming down and stopping simmering, I definitely want to stir it this much. But it will come down to a slow stir. I will not walk away from the stove for the next hour. So I'm going to do the slightest bit of multitasking while I do this, and if I need to, I will drop into just filming and then voiceover. Steadily stirring, been going for probably 10 minutes, not very long. You can see I've got a little bit of color here. It's starting to get a little more blonde. Maya came in and strained my broth for me. It's sitting back here. I've got about, let's see, 6 quarts of broth, so about 1.5 gallons. Roughly, you want like at least a cup of roux per gallon of gumbo. And keep in mind, I've got 1.5 gallons of broth, but I've also got like a few pounds of sausage. I've got all that chicken. I have 2 pounds of shrimp. So this is a 14-quart stock pot, and I'm aiming to fill it mostly. So I'm making about 4 cups of roux. I might not Yeah, I'll probably end up using all of this. Again, I told you this isn't going to be a step-by-step tutorial because I'm trying to make a lot of this. I am heating this pan up back here, my big stock pot. And I've got my andouille sausage cut into little discs. Finding andouille that was actually like what I wanted, more authentic, it's actually hard. This is the first time I've found it around here. I've found andouille in the past that was like chicken or something like that, but it is traditionally pork. And it is traditionally a little spicy, not a whole lot, but it does have peppers in it. I'm going to lay a single row in the pan here to brown. And I like to, this is cooked, it's cured, so, and smoked. So I don't need to like cook it, but I'm just looking to kind of like really darken the edges of it to add flavor. And to do that, we want to make sure that we just do one row. If you crowd meat in a pan, you're not going to get good sears and good flavor because it's going to steam it. And it will, you know, just have a negative effect on the texture overall. I've got a bowl right here. I have everything ready. I can stop stirring this for maybe like 30 seconds, 40 seconds, but I don't want to let it go longer than that without moving. So I usually just keep stirring it and do everything else one-handed because some of you may actually be in possession of the capacity to lay something down for 40 seconds and come back to it, but I'm just easily distractible. So I'm gonna sit here and wish I had octopus arms while I cook this. Sausage, probably take me 3 batches to get all of the sausage browned. Three hours later. Oh, I'm joking. It hasn't been 3 hours. It has been 1 hour. Here's my roux. It is the color of milk chocolate, which is what I want. Could let it get a little bit darker than this, but this is probably pretty good. I'm going to take this off the heat. Now, you can, at this point, like, add your broth in here. But keep in mind, this is cooked flour in oil. This is very hot, long cooked oil. So when you put liquid in oil, it bubbles up real bad. And what would happen if I were to pour broth in here with as hot as this is, it would thicken like super fast because that flour. So I actually want to take it off the heat. I'm still going to stir it occasionally because there's a lot of heat going on here. But taking it off the heat, I don't have to worry about burning it. And then I'm going to move my big pot over and get everything ready. Where are my things? To put it all together. And then I'm going to simmer it even longer. So let me take this off the heat. I'm going to keep it close so I can still stir it. Move this guy over. There's the fat in this pan from browning my sausage. So I'm going to put this over medium heat. My sister-in-law's here. Michaela, say hello. Hello. To our farmer's table friends. Michaela, who has many nicknames. My favorite of which is mint chocolate cake.
It's actually my favorite too.
And so now it's just shortened, and so Michaela will come in, I'll be like, hey Cake, and people are like, why are you calling her that? I'm like, it's her name. I didn't make this stuff up, even though Ben made that one up. Alright, so this is going over medium heat, and here I've got my Holy Trinity, the bell peppers, the celery, and the onions. This is all going in. I'm just going to sweat this down for a few minutes. And then after a few minutes, I'll throw the garlic in. I don't want to put it in too early and risk burning it. Oh, hear that sizzle just from the liquid that's on my spatula from the veggies. Okay, this is going to be a little on the tricky side, but I'm going to let you guys see it. Aromatics are in here. The garlic is in there. I put a big handful of chopped up parsley I ran out and got from the garden before I started. And here's my roux, which has darkened a little bit more, but you can see it's nice and smooth. Nice and even, not separated, and dark chocolate brown. So what I need to do is get my roux incorporated with the broth, get everything in this pot. Cake's over here helping pick chicken off the bone, and I've got my brown sausage, and I gotta grab the okra out of the freezer, which I can do that in a moment. It just goes in to simmer. So I'm gonna start, and this is gonna be a little dramatic. Even though this has cooled off and it started to thicken up, it's gonna bubble a lot whenever I put this in. I don't need to put all of the chicken broth into the roux, but I do want to get some in here so that I can pour it and incorporate it all. Okay, it's gonna be a little, okay, it's not that bad, good. So I'm just steadily whisking this into the roux. It didn't bubble up real bad. You can tell I was prepared for it to be really intense. And it'll thicken really fast. Just keep stirring. And I'm gonna mix some more of this broth in. I kind of panicked there for a minute because it looked like I was having some separation in my roux, and you don't want that, but I think it's going to be okay. Everything's coming together, and I think as it simmers, it'll be fine. So this is my pot. I'm going to add some bay leaves in here, a few of those. All right, chicken's going back in. Sausage going in. And this is gonna sit on low heat. I'm gonna put the lid on here a little bit off kilter so it's not a tight fit, so it doesn't get too hot in here. And this is gonna go on low heat for about 2 hours. Now this can simmer for a lot longer than that. I have 2 pounds of shrimp. That doesn't go in until like the end. It only needs to cook for like 10 minutes or so. I don't want it to get rubbery. And then I am gonna throw some paprika in. I'm not gonna do cayenne just because I'm cooking this pot of food for a lot of kids. If I were just eating it personally, I would put cayenne in it, but I can always do that like with individual bowls rather than the whole thing. Almost forgot the okra. That's where gumbo gets its name. That's enough. I have pushed my pot to its limits as I had meant to. So now we simmer. Now that the okra is in. You want to go at least 30 minutes at this point. You could go like hours. But at least 30 minutes. A couple hours is what I usually am aiming for. Okay, y'all. I'm gonna finish this video up because I'm about to have a house full. And I'm gonna show you our end product pot of gumbo. I thought I was recording and I was not. Forgot I had taken my memory card out. But I just added a tablespoon of gumbo file. It is ground sassafras. You wait till the end after you're done with any boiling to put this in because it can get bitter if you boil it. And I added my frozen shrimp. And over here I have the rice cooker on. So the end product be a bowl of white rice with gumbo spooned over top and a nice little sprinkle of chopped green onions on that. Of course, if anybody wants a little more heat on their bowl, they can put some cayenne pepper on it. But as it is full of flavor with that broth, all of those really flavorful meats. The sausage is adding a lot of flavor to that pot after it's simmered, and then of course we did put the seasoning in it and all the aromatics. Oh, that's it. This is one of those meals that, I mean, you spend pretty much all day making, so I make a lot. That, as I said, that 14-quart pot is completely full. We'll probably eat maybe half of that tonight with the number of people that we'll have here. And you can freeze it, but we'll eat it as leftovers over the next couple of days. So Thank you for hanging out with me today. You know, I love a fast meal. I love eating simple food, but occasionally I love being able to just spend my day cooking something that I cannot just simply go get down the road at a restaurant. It's one of the many benefits of having some skills in the kitchen is that you get to eat really good food. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today and all the days you do. I bless you. Until next time.